Astralis making headlines once again. Not a surprise. They seem to be an organisation that is determined one way or another to be in everyone's collective consciousness. And certainly they've had way more negative headlines than positive ones of late. Obviously, I've been chronicling all of their mistakes. Very often been the journalist that's kind of been responsible for exposing a lot of the things that has been going on, and they were in the news again because, bizarrely, ESL announced that they were going to be penalising Astralis and fining them $100,000 following on from an investigation. ESL put out this announcement saying that they have issued a sanction through the Louvre Agreement. The Louvre Agreement, for those who don't know, was the contract that was signed by all of the teams that wanted to be in Pro League and ESL themselves. So essentially what they've all entered into is a business partnership where they do a revenue share. Those teams agree to play in the league. ESL agreed to handle marketing and promotion around the league and get sponsors and that kind of thing. And then we're all going to split the money. And, just in case you're new to this stuff and you're wondering why we're talking about the Louvre, amazed that has been burnt down to the ground. And you can see the headline is Louvre Agreement Sanctions, Conflict of Interest Case in CSGO 2021. Now, we all know conflict of interest in CSGO is a rarity. It happened all the way back in 2021, did it? Well, anyway, the statement was, in January 2023, the Commissioner's Office of the Louvre Agreement was made aware of a range of claims about a possible breach of the partnership's rules and regulations. In line with its governance code, an independent investigation was commissioned, approved by the ESL Pro League's executive board. That investigation is now concluded. It found that Astralis asked for and received services from a future employee between April and July 2021, which created a conflict of interest as that party held a position of authority within a competitor team. It did not report this to the league authorities and the competing team itself. This was found to be a breach of the regulations of the Louvre Agreement. Other claims were investigated in this process, however, no other breaches were identified. As a result, the executive board has decided that Astralis is fined a grand total of $100,000 for maintaining and not reporting an existing conflict of interest. This total includes legal and procedural fees. The independent inquiry found that no competition or match results were impacted, which the executive board wishes to place on record. And this is Anders Horsholt. He is the CEO of Astralis and still is, because obviously, as we'll get to in a moment, this is all linked to other Astralis news. But yes, from the moment Astralis were approached by the Commissioner's Office with regards to these allegations, we worked closely and collaboratively with them, the executive board and the investigators, to support the process. We are equally surprised and disappointed with the conclusion of the investigation, but we believe all parties have learned a lot throughout this process, and we accept the verdict. In Astralis, we firmly believe in maintaining high standards of professionalism, integrity, and fair play. And as such, we are proud of the fact that the Louvre Agreement is at the forefront of good governance and regulatory discipline, under which a complaint by a member is taken seriously and followed up on with a thorough investigation. We also wish to recognise the diligent work done by all involved parties in this matter. As the Louvre Agreement is a continually evolving document, we anticipate working together with the members in the near future to see if and how we can iterate this process further and keep it at that best practice level. And then Alex Inglot, who is the commissioner of the ESL Pro League, says, thankfully, the need to investigate a member is rare, but we will always act on critical information and investigate their relevance. We ensured that all steps of the process set out in our agreement were followed, using industry-leading independent experts along the way. The findings notwithstanding, I would like to commend the constructive manner in which Astralis conducted themselves throughout the inquiry and upon its outcome. Our ESL Pro League fans, partners and participants expect us and our members to operate with the highest standards of integrity, both on the server and away from it. We are proud to have had support from a range of individuals and organisations during this investigation and to have finalised a position that reassures all involved. So, right, you'll notice there's a bunch of... There's no names mentioned. There's nothing here. I will add, I'll get a compliment out the way up front. I think it's very good that ESL actually investigated this and took action upon it themselves without waiting for ESIC, but also were proactive. Spoiler, as we'll get to, they were proactive. I mean, I don't mind saying this. I did send them what I had, because this relates to me, because of course it does. Because I don't think many other people are sort of interested in keeping the scene clean. And I'm still trying to do it, but I'm running out of time. I'm increasingly bored by the endless repetition of everyone in esports doing bad things behind the scenes and people just saying, well, as long as the money comes in and the games get played, it's all okay, which is pretty much where we're at. There are no standards. We've had a massive backslide lately on integrity issues. We don't really much care about conflict of interest anymore. We barely even register it. We got players that own pieces of teams joining other teams and potentially playing against former teams. In 2016, Valve said you've got to disclose and recuse yourself. You've got to sell shares and ownership if you want to play in these competitions. Now everyone just goes, oh, who gives a fuck? It's boring, isn't it? It's boring trying to maintain integrity. No one really cares. I'm pretty sure, based on the dates and everything they've set out. This relates to some reporting I did on my Substack. The Hunden Files. The Hunden Files basically were, there is an ongoing lawsuit, there's an ongoing case between Heroic and Hunden, and obviously potentially Astralis, going on in Denmark. And I've been keeping abreast of this while this has been going on since it started, because the one thing that I think has gone on in the Danish scene is that a bunch of forces have essentially collaborated and colluded to try and keep Astralis in, and this is just my own opinion, to try and keep Astralis in a prominent position. Meanwhile, it always seems to be at the expense of Heroic. It just always seems to be Heroic that are somehow taking the blows, and it just seems a bit ridiculous. But as I was keeping an eye on which way this case was going to go, because I was going to report on it when the outcome happened, and then because of my extensive sources in Denmark, because everybody should know by now, but some of the first LAN events I went to were Denmark. I used to go to all the LAN events in Denmark all of the time. I got a lot of friends in the Danish scene and extended that source network beyond just people that I know and people that play CSGO, and I've written extensively about the business side of esports in Denmark. It's a scene I'm very well connected in, and that's not going to change. And so I got wind of, there was actually another court case where there's some documentation, should you be able to obtain it, of text messages between Hunden and Casper Fit at Astralis. And what you'll see is that Casper Fit was basically tasking Hunden with doing things for Astralis while Hunden was working at Heroic. And then this led to what eventually went on to become his suspension, because he potentially leaked access to a scrapbook and all this other stuff. And nobody had got to the bottom of what had gone on behind the scenes. Everybody knew essentially what had gone on. Rumors were circulating. It was very easy to put all the pieces together to sort of come up with a narrative that made logical, coherent sense, but no one had seen the extent of it. And so I was able, through the various sources, to get the text messages that were entered into the court record between Hunden and Casper Fit, to get them translated by two separate translators. This was 101 pages of documents in Danish. This is how I'm living, guys. This is what I do. You don't understand how sick I am. You have to be deranged to even want to do this in your spare time. 101 pages of documents and conversations in Danish that I got translated by 2 separate translators, verified. Then I had the veracity of the documentation verified by the court, and so I was able to basically say, right, not only do I know what's in these these messages, I know they're real, I know they're entered into the record, and I know that actually they will be a matter of public record should somebody want to come along and obtain them. So with all of that knowledge, I started publishing them, and trust me, it was like threats and all sorts of immediate drama. But the bottom line is, I broke it down into 4 parts that just showed that, to varying degrees, Hunden, while under the employ of Heroic, essentially worked for Astralis as well, knowing he was going to move there, knowing he'd accepted a deal. So I don't think it's any coincidence that this fine has come in. And obviously as well, we had the news that Kasperfit and Hunden are out, that they left the organization. Now, I don't know if people sort of put it all together, but it's sort of very hard for me to believe that after all the trouble they went to bring Hunden in, and all the PR hit they took to bring Hunden in, and all the lauding of Hunden. They have guys like Device going into the media and saying he's actually a good guy. Poor Device used once again. Anyway, so it seems to me insane that you go to all of that trouble, you take all that PR hit, and then you get rid of him. You fire him. You usher him out with Kasperfit, the man directly responsible for hiring him, and in all of those conversations that are now publicly available, that we also know, by the way, because ESL have conducted their own investigation, which they said they hired an independent body to do, we now know they're real. Right? So even if you thought, Richie Lewis, he's definitely wrong this time, 100%. Well, now it's been independently confirmed by their business partners. And they've accepted the fine of $100,000, even though they're going, we're a bit upset, a bit surprised, but we respect it. So yeah, this is the confirmation here that they parted ways with both of them in the 3rd week of June. This year. I can only speculate, but I'm gonna say I think all of these things are linked. I don't know. Maybe there's some sort of thread here. Now, what's interesting is Hunden says no. Actually, there isn't any connection. He put a statement out on the day that this news went out and said, with ESL's recent statement relating to an investigation into potential breaches of the Louvre Agreement's code of conduct, I would like to make a brief statement regarding the conclusions of the investigation. This is the 2nd investigation into this subject, which that's news to me. Is the first one, is he referring to the ESIC investigation? Because the ESIC investigation wasn't really into the conflict of interest. The ESIC investigation was into the integrity issue of him having potentially leaked a scrapbook to an opponent at a tournament. Astralis were due to play them. Spoiler, Heroic. Astralis Heroic. So that wasn't what they were investigating, I don't believe. But, obviously, Hunden lawyered up. And I think the original report isn't even on ESIC's website anymore. So, great, I guess. But anyway, he said I think that's a bit disingenuous to say it's the 2nd time he's been a 2nd investigation into this subject. This is just focusing on the conflict of interest aspect. And spoiler, for the 1st investigation, these messages, these interactions, they didn't exist. And then he says, and it's likewise the 2nd time I've not been sanctioned. Well, again, in this instance, I don't believe there would ever be a sanction for Hunden, because while he's the conduit, it's Astralis that are the business partner in the Louvre agreement, and it's Astralis that have failed to report the conflict of interest, and Astralis that have induced the negative behaviour, and it's Astralis who've been punished. So I think it's safe to say that you were never in the frame for an individual sanction, but the fact that Astralis have been sanctioned shows that indeed something wrong did occur. In the first event, I was originally banned by the organisation behind the banning order, that's ESIC, but the banning order was later revoked and deleted with retroactive effect. This time around, the investigation concluded that there was no grounds for sanctioning me, and I was placed within the non-sanctionable conduct in its conclusive and independent findings. I have cooperated fully with ESL and their third-party investigators in their examination of the events by providing all necessary documents and participating in relevant interviews. And I have spent a substantial amount of my own time and resources into this investigation. I would like to empathize. I think he means emphasize, but that's fine. Those are two tricky words for a non-native speaker. I would like to emphasize that my departure from Astralis was not connected to the ESL investigation, and would like to request that any questions in relation to Astralis' role in the recent announcement be directed at them. Finally, I would like to thank ESL and Sport Radar. So he's revealed there who the independent body was that did the investigation. I would like to thank ESL and Sport Radar for a thorough and professional procedure where I feel like I've had an opportunity to present my case and be heard. Now, that's kind of interesting because what that says to me is that ESL have had to bring in an external party to how they would usually do things in order to issue this penalty and in order to conduct this investigation. You see, in the past, it's always been the contention by ESL that they have to go through ESIC because ESIC, they are in the esports integrity, they're part of that coalition. They recognize the commission's authority. The commission is funded in part by ESL, and they've always said in the past, you know, whenever people like me have got gobby and said, look, you know, fucking, why are you not punishing these players yourself? They've always said, we have to wait on the findings of an ESIC investigation. Now, what can I conclude from this? Well, it seems that the Louvre party, the Louvre agreement teams, are willing to bring in Sport Radar, I assume from Hunden's statement, to conduct investigations and get them resolved in a timely fashion for all member partners. And that's great. And that's what they should have been doing the whole time. They should have been doing it for other teams, other orgs. You know, if you think about it, when it became clear that ESIC were never going to deliver on the North American match-fixing stuff, they should have took all of the findings and took all of the information, and they should have brought in an independent person to do it. But they didn't, and they said, oh, we can't. Our hands are tied. But evidently, when you're paying to be a business partner of ESL, it turns out, actually, no, we will get an external party to conduct this investigation. So I think that's a very interesting thing that's occurred there because it essentially undermines ESIC. We've said many times ESIC is held upright by ESL recognising its authority. And if ESL are now bringing in Sport Radar of all people, Sport Radar are a very well-known ombudsman. Sport Radar are basically, they monitor betting data. And if they see any irregularities, this is just one of the services they offer. You pay them a fee and they send you alerts. Or they have an extensive network in the world of sports. So maybe they hear about, you know, like that thing that just happened in Brazilian football recently, you know, where we've got referees and players and teams colluding, again, for match fixing. They will make you aware that that's going on in that league, you know, if you're a stakeholder. And they do things like that, but you have to pay for it. If you go and read my Mountain of Match Fixing opening chapter, one of the things that really pissed me off is I contacted Sport Radar. I contacted all of the big wigs at Sport Radar and said, I have got a slam dunk case of match fixing in NA. I've got names, aliases, monetary paper trails, betting data that corroborates the games that were fixed, and a timeline within which it all happened, I'll send it to you if you promise that you'll, issue some penalties or at least make some recommendations that these guys, their teams, can never be, you can never place a bet on these guys ever again. And I got nothing back. They just didn't reply. They weren't interested in that. Because ultimately, the bottom line is, I'm saying to them, I'll do all the investigative work for you. But they go, oh, okay, and we'll issue the sanctions, but what do we get out of it? They'd rather ESL went to them, like I'm guessing they did in this instance, and say, will you do it for us? And then they can charge a fee. And then that's how they get paid. So this is the other issue. Just it affects all of sports, and it's why I'm particularly jaded with taking on these individual cases and individual stories, because the big picture doesn't change, because ultimately upholding integrity itself has become commodified and become a business. I mean, it's obvious to a certain degree that is what would happen because it's essentially a service and people charge for services. But how do you deal with tackling problems when, if people look at the problem and go, okay, that's potentially destructive to the fabric of esports, but I'm not going to fix it even though I have the tools to do so because no one will pay me to do it? Well, all right then, I guess. We are resigned to the worst case scenario, unfortunately. So anyway, that was Astralis and Hunden in the news once again. And I got to say, I don't really know what comes next for Hunden as a coach. There were rumors circulating prior to all of this drama that some of the people who had invested in Astralis were thinking about maybe breaking away and relaunching Copenhagen Wolves, and Hunden was going to be potentially the GM for that. That was a rumor that was going on behind the scenes. And again, I don't really care about talking about these rumors now because I'm just getting less and less connected to this space. But the reality is, surely now Astralis was like the last chance saloon for him. Because I think the problem has been his complete lack of contrition the entire time. He claimed, that he was the victim in the heroic story with the cheating scandal. And he threw players under the bus. And he abused trust. And he manipulated someone that's on the spectrum. And he did all these terrible things. And then went on a Danish media tour, thanks to TV2.dk mostly, saying he was the victim in all of this, when he got investigated again for other issues relating to the Strat book. He said he'd done absolutely nothing wrong because they were his to begin with. I didn't leak them, but if I did, they were mine to leak. Then you go away into the wilderness. You take pictures of yourself working in a bar saying new beginnings, knowing fine well that you're actually doing some sort of clandestine work for Astralis in the form of Pixel TV, which is a precursor to you taking a full-time job with them. Once your banner's expired, you then mysteriously find the money to lawyer up. You tackle ESIC, you undermine them to such a degree. I think that was ultimately the fatal blow in their authority in CSGO. I don't think anyone will recognize their authority after that. Even if they came back, all brand spanking new, saying they were going to do X, Y, and Z, all the promises. Unfortunately, they've got a credibility crisis. And then on top of that, now you've been investigated again. Your org that you work for has been penalized for a non-disclosed conflict of interest, of which you were the conflict of interest. And then you say, well, look, hashtag not my money, essentially. It wasn't me. It seems crazy to me to think that anyone would want to take a risk on him again. And by a risk, I mean just the reputational hit you would take for bringing him in. The community, for once, seems to have correctly aligned themselves. It's not like Config, I promise I'll never drink again if you all just forgive me for breaking my own leg in a fight I started. And everyone goes, wow, Config's a saint. When he dies, his bones will be put in a chest and esports plebs from all over the world will come to touch it, right? But, for once, the CS scene seems to have correctly fucking identified, like, maybe this Hunden cat did a few bad things, So there's that.